Hi, I'm Charles Galda, your host for Vision New England's Church in Action program. This week, I'm talking with Dr. Karen Mason of Gordon-Conwell Theological Seminary. Karen, thanks for being with us again.
Thank you so much for having me, Charles.
Hey, for folks who didn't hear last time you were on or don't remember, could you share a little about your background and bio? How did you get to Gordon-Conwell? What do you do there? That kind of stuff.
Well, I'm a professor of counseling and psychology at Gordon-Conwell. I've been here since 2006. Actually native of Colorado, but my parents were missionaries in France and Austria. So typical TCK, if you ask me where I'm from, I'm not sure how to answer that question. I've taught in a mission school in Pakistan. I've taught actually Hebrew and Greek and French in Haiti. I have a master's in Old Testament. I have a master's and PhD in counseling psychology. So how I got here, actually, before moving here, I was managing the Office of Suicide Prevention for the state of Colorado at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. And there, we were helping all kinds of people with suicide prevention, home health care, primary care, physicians, schools. And I knew as a person of faith that it would be really important to help churches as well, come alongside churches in what they wanted to do. But nobody was sure about how to do that. And so I made a note to myself, if I ever have a chance to go into an academic setting, I'd like to study that. And that's a lot of what I've been doing for 20 years, besides training students become master's level counselors. The other hat I wear is as a researcher, and have been researching just what's really vital and crucial about the church when it comes to suicidal congregants.
And so I'll be the first one to early congratulate you on your 20-year anniversary at Gordon-Conwell.
Coming up.
And so now what got you focused on, you just mentioned suicidal ideation, and that's part of what we're going to talk about today. And so what got you interested in that topic?
Yeah, and I have to say, my mom often asks me, isn't it a little bit depressing? And I just find it so hopeful, because I really do think about the help that we can bring to people. So to me, it's a very hopeful kind of topic. But I think how I got started was I had a client with multiple personalities, which we now call dissociative identity disorder. And she had been suicidal all her life. The first time she remembers thinking about suicide was at age 3. Wow. And sadly, another part of her story was that her church had held an exorcism for her and she never went back. I just thought that story was tragic, but I also wanted to help her. And I think that's where I got interested in suicide prevention. I didn't know how to help her, but I made it my job to figure out how to help her. And I was convinced, I'm still convinced, of the importance of the church. And I'm sorry for her sake that I think there was a bit of oversimplification about what goes on for people who have suicidal thinking, and that it's only about the work of Satan, or it's only about spiritual issues, and that there aren't any biological, psychological issues that might also be at play. I'm sorry for that in her life. But at the same time, I just feel very hopeful and also just very committed to helping people who come to me for help to help them choose life.
Well, you just hit on something that I think is a historical thing in the church that I know you've been working to try and help us work our way through. But for a long time, I think most people felt where the church was is if you are having any kind of mental health issues, this is a spiritual issue, and you need to solve that. And so let me test this with you. What I always think about is, and sometimes they're right. And so a good starting point is looking at our spiritual lives and our health, our physical life, our mental life, all those kinds of things. But your experiences, but that doesn't solve everybody.
It didn't for this client, sadly. So I think we do need to, as you point out, Charles, spiritual aspects of a person are always there. You know, do we want to pray for people who are struggling with suicidal thinking? Of course, absolutely. And let's not stop praying for people with mental health conditions with suicidal thinking. But at the same time, you know, could there be additional kinds of things that are going on for this person? So I just want to read a quote actually from Charles Spurgeon, who was he was a pastor and a revivalist.
Oh yeah.
In the 1800s, a well-known pastor revivalist, and Charles Spurgeon really struggled with depression, and he really struggled with suicidal thinking. And he says a few things. One of them is, and he's hearkening back to 1 Kings 19 when Elijah is sitting under that, he calls it the juniper bush. And he says, don't forget that when we people get under the juniper bush ourselves, we're glad to recall the fact that Elijah was once there. You're not the first child of God who's been depressed or troubled. And I think that's such an important thought. But then he goes on to say that we can't give up on the medicines that are available when we're going through these kinds of things. So even Spurgeon was recognizing that there are other factors besides that spiritual factor. Spiritual factors are always part of what's going on with us as humans, but there's more. And for instance, if a friend, a congregant was struggling with diabetes, you wouldn't suggest that she only pray. You would suggest that she go get some of that help that God, through common grace, has allowed science to discover.
Yeah. In a fallen world, we inhabit fallen bodies.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a good argument that we have on why that would only present physical maladies.
That's right.
And the chemicals and all that stuff play out in other ways too that we would diagnose as mental health. And I think if we go back in time, we can identify more and more people in depression in particular. We really diagnose them from 100 years vantage point and who we never met and all that. But there's a lot of evidence that Abraham Lincoln suffered from clinical depression.
That's right. That's right.
We don't have the words recorded for us, but the behavior certainly fits, doesn't it?
That's right. Exactly. I mean, we have other examples in the Bible would. And by the way, I don't know if this is depression, but in the Bible, we have people who struggle with wanting to stay alive, right? So I was just mentioning Elijah in 1 Kings 19, Moses in Numbers 11, Jonah 4, Job loathes his life in Job 10, in Psalm 88. The psalmist says that darkness is his only companion. So clearly people of faith reach these points. I was just mentioning the example of Spurgeon. You mentioned Abraham Lincoln. Edward J. Carnell, who was the past president of Fuller, actually writes about his depression and suicidal thinking. So yeah, absolutely. People of faith have struggled with these issues, over a long period of time.
And so now you've been in this field for a while. Would you say, and not specifically with suicidal ideation, although not to eliminate that, is this a problem that has been affecting a segment of the population and it's still about that same segment size? Or is this something growing and do we know why it's growing? Or fill us in a little bit about what you're seeing more holistically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really interesting. And the research is that about 20% of Americans has a mental health condition at any point in time. So that means that, that's that 20%, that's 1 out of 5 people. So that's a good bunch. That's a good chunk of the U.S. population. So my guess is that it either as a person in that category, one of the Americans with a mental health condition, so or you're a family member or a friend or a fellow congregant of somebody with a mental health condition. So most of us have some kind of experience with mental health conditions. Interestingly enough, when it comes to suicides, that number actually went down during the pandemic. And usually it's because we tend in national emergencies to pull together. But those numbers are slowly creeping back up. And so, there's a lot of theories as to what is going on, and especially with young people, with social media, that sense of greater disconnection that young people feel, despite the fact that we're quote unquote connected on social media. So we're also comparing ourselves to other people's beautiful lives on the internet. So there's a lot of theories.
We're connected enough to want to hate each other on social media, right?
Yes.
Going back to your 1 in 5 number, what would you say to the person who hears that and says, well, come on, we overdiagnose an awful lot of stuff in this country, and that's an inflated number. And what would you say to that person?
Generally speaking, we tend to underdiagnose because people don't reach out for help. These are really highly stigmatized issues, right? Having a mental, despite the fact that it's so prevalent, there's a lot of stigma, and so people. And also people don't always trust that treatments are helpful. They prefer to see if they can help themselves before they reach out for help to someone else. So most people don't seek treatment. So my guess is that it's going to be underdiagnosed, not overdiagnosed.
And some of us wouldn't know there's anything to report. I'm remembering when I was in my 20s and my doctor said to me, my physical, are you under any stress? And I'm like, how would I know? And and I said, but I don't think so. And he said, well, and they started listing things. I'm like, oh yeah, all the time.
All of those all the time. Yes, right.
And so we don't even realize some of us need help to just put the words to it to know what's really going on inside of us too, which would
right.
Underdiagnose us. And
right.
So speak, if you would. So you're doing some work in this space on tell us what you're doing, and is there a role for some of us to play in it?
Yes. So just very, very excited to thank you, Charles, for letting me have this opportunity to talk about this study that we're doing. So we're trying to understand how many people in churches actually have suicidal thinking. So if you look at the national rate, it's 5% of people over a period of 1 year will have thought about suicide. But what's been interesting is that in some of the studies that we've done, the number's bigger. And so we're curious about this. We're trying to figure this out. What is the actual prevalence of people in churches with suicidal behaviors? So in one study, we found that 11% of congregants had current suicidal thinking. In another study, we found that 66% had suicidal thinking at some point across their lifetime. Barna has found that 18% of senior pastors have thought about self-harm or suicide over the past year. So, we're trying to figure out, well, what is the number? Those are wildly different numbers. And so what we're looking for is 2,517 people. And that's a power calculation. We're trying to get enough people to be able to make a claim about how many people in churches have suicidal thinking. And we need people who have never been suicidal and people who have experienced suicidal behaviors. So we're trying to look at the whole church across the gamut. So anybody 18 years or older who attends church at least once a month in person, we would like for, whether they've thought about suicide or not, we would like for them to take our survey.
And how, when you get the response, how do you break out? And maybe it's the way, I'm sure you ask the question to tease it out, because I just think about, as a teenager, I thought about killing myself. I don't think it was never serious, I don't think. It's a passing thought. And there have been days I'm like, oh, boy. Right? So how do you parse out the people who are probably more fleeting thoughts that pop into your head versus someone who's serious, to know how big the problem is?
Mm-hmm. Well, and that really matters to me as a psychologist, right? When I'm talking to somebody with suicidal thinking, I'm trying to figure out, how serious is this? What kind of help do we need here? And so that really matters to me. Is this more what you're talking about, Charles, is maybe more passive suicidal thinking, like, oh, it would be good if I just didn't wake up tomorrow morning? Or is it active? I'm actively trying to think about, how I might follow through on these thoughts. So that really matters to me as a psychologist, trying to situate that. For this particular survey, we just want to know, we have 3 different measures of suicidal thinking. So we just want to know, using these 3 different measures, and these are validated measures. We want to know how many people in churches will report having either, as you point out, passive thoughts at some point in their life. One of those measures is going to ask that question, but other measures are going to ask more, do you have the thought right now? And to how strong are these thoughts, and that sort of thing. So, we're kind of looking at it in different ways, depending on these 3 different measures.
So where can folks go to help you with this?
Yes. So Vision New England, thank you very much, Charles, is going to be sending out a link in a newsletter, an upcoming newsletter. If they want to have more information, please reach out to me, Karen Mason. It's kmason@gordonconwell.edu. So kmason@gordonconwell.edu. If you want to participate, before you get that survey link in the Vision New England newsletter, you can reach out to me.
And so, so in our next newsletter, be looking for it. And if you have trouble getting to Karen, let me know and I'll get you there too. I'm cgald@visionnewengland.org. And you can go on our website and get an email to us. And so you need 2,500 plus people to do that.
Yes.
And without the results, let's talk about other data that's out there, because I think a lot of us, I'm tail end boomer, will find it hard to believe this is a meaningful problem in churches.
Yes.
And I think maybe there's an open question about whether it was a meaningful problem for tail end boomers or boomers.
Mm-hmm.
Are you seeing something different in younger people that suggests maybe it's a bigger problem in churches that we're not connected enough to realize, because there's a generational difference here?
Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, so young females, in fact, have a tendency to attempt suicide. And I think that's why we associate suicide with young people. Also, because of the changes that young people go through biologically, that's when some of these mental health conditions or suicidal thinking tend to show up. But interestingly, the group that actually dies by suicide is white middle-aged men. So it definitely is a problem across the age span that we want to pay attention to.
I know in Jonathan Haidt's book, which I'm sure you're familiar with, The Anxious Generation,
Mm-hmm.
he talks about that there's been an uptick with young people, not specifically in the church, but is that your research and understanding as well, that this is a growing problem amongst young people?
It's a growing problem across the population. It's the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. So it's certainly a a public health issue that we ought to be paying attention to. You mentioned, is this a problem in churches? I think that's the other reason why we'd like to do the prevalence study, why we're doing the prevalence study. Because here's my suspicion, Charles, is that this is a group of people that sit in our churches every Sunday who are trying to make sense out of what's going on and apply it to their situation, but sometimes aren't always sure how it applies. And so one of the big reasons why this is such a passion for me is that these people are not getting ministered to. So let me just give you an example. So Acts 16, Paul saves the life of the Philippian jailer. This is a stunning, beautiful example of suicide prevention. But Charles, I've heard, I grew up, my dad was a pastor, missionary. I grew up in the church. I have never heard, I've heard many sermons, many devotionals on Acts 16. I've never heard the word suicide prevention. And this is the best example of suicide prevention in the Bible. And here's how I think that passage is just so important to suicidal Christians and why I see that as a missed opportunity, right? That we aren't talking about this issue. And that's that the Philippian jailer must have been a scuzzy kind of guy. And here's why, because at the end of the passage, and I always wondered why it came up at the end, it says that the Philippian jailer treated Paul and Silas's wounds. Well, that means he didn't do it before. So here's a guy who probably didn't treat Paul and Silas very well. And yet, when the earthquake happens, I would have expected Paul to say, hallelujah, praise the Lord, and run out of prison. Thank you, God, for my freedom. And instead, he stops and saves this guy's life, who probably wasn't the best human in the world. And here's the application to suicidal Christians, and I think the opportunity we're missing. His life matters. His life mattered to God. God wanted to have a relationship to this Philippian jailer to such an extent that he put Paul and Silas near him so that Paul could lead this man to Christ and his whole household. I think that's an important point that suicidal Christians need to know, that they ought to choose life because their life matters to God.
Yeah, and I want to switch to text because we only got a few minutes left. I want to ask you one other question, but I do want to just affirm, I've talked to so many pastors who, after they've shared their mental health struggles, their spouse's mental health struggles, a kid's mental, from the pulpit, people come out of the woodwork.
Yes.
Telling them, I've been struggling with and needing. And so they're there, but because we don't speak to it, they don't come to us. Yes. But let me shift gears for a minute. So we just know God, we see more and more data and evidence that God is doing something very different in New England these days. So I'd love to hear you have some little story of something you saw God do that has you excited, whether that's related to a seminary, other ministry work you do, your person, whatever it is.
Yes. Well, the thing that I wish I had a more personal story, but I'm going to share something a little more general just about suicide prevention. So one of the things that really strikes me when Jesus is announcing the kingdom of God is that he goes around and heals people. I think healing is a really important part of what we do in churches. And I think caring for suicidal congregants is one of the ways that plays out. And I think the fact that God is interested in healing, I think was probably wildly exciting news back in Jesus's day. I think that's wildly exciting news in our day also. I think the other piece that I'll kind of add to that, besides the fact that God really cares about our healing, I think the other piece is just that through common grace, God has allowed science to discover many effective treatments for mental health and suicidal behavior. So a lot of people don't seek help because they don't believe that treatments are effective. Well, they are.
Yeah. Well, that is good news. And that's
Yes.
what you bring us. Karen, thank you so much for your ministry. Thanks for taking time to talk to us about it today.
Thank you.
For all you do, and just have a great rest of the day and your week. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this opportunity so much.
This program is created by Vision New England, which helps the church work in unity to make disciples, do justice, and share Jesus, to accelerate evangelism so that New England will be transformed. You can find additional resources and partner in our mission at visionnew.org. This program is brought to you by our friends at the Palau Association, who are dedicated to proclaiming the good news, uniting the church, and impacting cities worldwide. Join us next Sunday at 2 p.m. on Life Changing Radio. Thanks so much, and God bless you.
At Leadership Transformations, we believe that when you have the right resources to help you slow down and experience a deep and refreshing connection to God, you can become the discerning leader you know you are created to be. Friends, Steve Macchia here, and I have a free gift for your soul. It's called Pathways. Pathways is our weekly email aimed at offering you soul-nourishing content for the journey. It contains readings, prayers, spiritual practices, a link to the Discerning Leader podcast, as well as information about all of our upcoming soul care retreats, workshops, and online offerings. So head on over to leadershiptransformations.org today and sign up for this free resource. It will help you slow down and be more. God bless you, friends.